Everybody, we're at our starting point. I will say that on behalf of certainly town staff and the town council, this is a benchmark day. We are starting the process to candidly move forward on the design of our community center. It's been a long time coming. Those of you who have been part of the advisory group have heard me talk about, we've been talking about a community center for probably 10 years. And as this process moves forward, the council was at a point earlier budget period last year, that we were able to earmark the money for the construction of it, and we're going through the process of getting everything organized and ready to go. We've had several advisory group meetings to talk about form and function and the kinds of things that we think should be part of the community center. I am thrilled that you all are here to be part of this. This is a community center, so the community must be involved in how it goes together, what we think, what you think, because you're going to be using them. So your input is absolutely important. I'm going to turn it over to Hank here in a second. He'll give you some very specific instructions on what to do with yellow sheets in front of you. But once again, thank you for being here, and thank you guys very much for being part of this process.
Good evening. For the folks that sit at the table with these yellow sheets in front of you, let me show you what they are. They are 2 pages. They are identical. They're front and back, page 1 and page 2. There is one for each firm that you will be listening to this evening. If you could, on each one of them, write the name of the firm, and on the front page of it, the first firm this evening is Stewart, Cooper & Newell. Go ahead and put them in on the front sheet. As you listen to the presentation, this is not a very complicated rating form, but there is 7 sections on the front side, followed by a couple of open-ended spots on the back side on page number 2. What you're going to hear tonight from each presenter is 45 minutes of presentation, followed by 30 minutes of questions that you guys could ask the firms, or I guess staff could, and the mayor and council could as well. And then following that time, or what time we exhaust questions, there will be a 15-minute break in which we will change out the firms, and we will have the second group come in and begin after that. All right, anybody got any questions? At the end of the evening, once you have both of your forms filled out and completed, there is a wicker basket that sits on the back table. Place your completed rating sheet on the table in the basket, and that will be it for you. It's an anonymous form. You don't have to worry about anybody tracking you down and know who you are if you listen to it. And then for those who did not get the sign-in sheet, I did try to take it around to everybody, but if you did not sign in this evening, it is also on the white table at the back as well. With us over here. And that is it. So I'm going to turn it over to the first group that is going to be presenting this evening. They are Stewart, Cooper & Newell. That's all I'm going to say at this point. I'm going to introduce you to Kenneth Newell, who is going to introduce the rest of his team and start the presentation.
Right. Now, you didn't use a microphone, but we need to.
You can if you like, or you can just belt it out.
We're glad to bail out. Can everybody hear us okay?
If you will use the microphone, because we need to put it up for the TV monitor.
That's good.
Glad to. Okay, so that sounds loud. Is it loud to you? Yeah. Good evening. I'm Ken Newell. Thank you for having us here. As you can tell already, I've got the face for radio, so I'm not used to being on the camera. But appreciate you having us here tonight. I'm Ken Newell with Stewart, Cooper & Newell Architects. And we're thrilled about the opportunity of presenting to you, talking about qualifications, but specifically talking about your project. If you find that I'm not loud enough, tell me and I'll bring it closer to my mouth. If I'm too loud, I'll pull it further away. So please just give me an idea as we move forward. So we're going to stick nearly as close to the schedule as we can, about 45 minutes worth of presentation. I think that we've answered a lot of the questions that have been previously submitted or talked about on the project, so we're happy to be here on that. I will, as we go forward, be introducing the team that I've got with me and several other team members who are not with us tonight. They always told me in school, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, right? Here's where I tell you what we're going to tell you. So this is the agenda we plan on talking about tonight. It doesn't have to stay in this order. If you have a question or need to change the order up of this, we'll be glad to do that. I tell people I'm married. I have small kids. I'm used to being interrupted. I don't mind being interrupted at all. But this is what our agenda looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about the design team that we're proposing for your important project. Spend a little bit of time talking about community center design experience. that the team has in conjunction with all of us. We're going to look at a case study, specifically one that I feel that is somewhat closely related to your project, and show you some imagery and how that planning took place and what the results of that would be in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and talk about the Lewisville Community Center project itself, and close out with a few references, summary, and project discussion. I've got a handful of the presentation that I'm showing you that I will at the end of the presentation, we'll hand out to you folks, particularly hopefully those of you at the tables, and so we'll see how far they go at that time. So the reason I tell you that is you don't have to feel like that if you see something interesting, you have to make a note on it. Hopefully you'll be able to see that as we move forward. All right, the design team. So one of the things I like to point out when I get to this chart is look at the very top of the slide. That's you. Okay, we always remember that you are not just the client on this, you're part of the design team. It's important that the rest of the people below that title of yourself listens carefully about what your goals, concerns, and desires are. Ultimately, somewhere in the future, the design team is going to leave the project and ultimately even leave the city limits of Lewisville, but you're going to be here. So we need to make sure that we're always responding to you. You're at the top of the totem pole. We never forget that. We're a design team and a design firm that we like to think does not have a big ego. We're not here to try to make our statement in Lewisville. We're trying to make your statement for Lewisville. So starting at the top of below that, I am the architect of record, the principal in charge on the project. A lot of firms would come in and present to you with the president or the owner of the company or someone of that nature, and then if they're successful getting the project, hand that off to someone else in the back room. You'll always have to look at my ugly face if you select us on this project, okay? I'm going to be involved from day one. There's plenty of other people that you see on the chart that will also be associated from the design team, but I will always be your point of contact, one of your points of contact on the project. And so we take pride in that we are a small enough firm that we are able to give you very personalized attention from the ownership of the firm down. So I will serve as that project architect and principal in charge. The next person down listed in the photograph you see to the right is Jim Stumbo. He's not with me tonight, but he is one of my two other partners. He will serve as quality control, principal in quality control. I will say this, he will not be involved in the day-to-day activities of your project, and that's for a reason. Because when the project eventually makes its way all the way through the design, all the way through the construction documents, the thick sets of plans and specs, he will be looking then at that sets of plans and specs to make sure they are accomplishing what I intend them to make. We've learned over the years, and we've been in business since 1971, we've learned over the years that if you spend too much time every day looking at the details, you're prone to miss something. And so by having him come in at individual phases to make some quality control evaluations, it helps make sure that we are crossing the T's and dotting the I's as we move forward. In the left-hand side of the chart, these are the engineering consultants that we have on board with us, and several I have with me tonight, and I'll introduce you to those. These are the folks that are not in Stuart Cooper Newell's office. We bring them on in their teams that we hire regularly to perform many of the services that are necessary, engineering services. The first on the list is Optima Engineering, Ron Allman, Ron Wave. Ron will speak to you here in just a moment. They serve as plumbing, mechanical, and electrical and fire protection engineering services on the project. The next below that is Brian Crutchfield. Brian? So Brian and his group, the Timmons group, they represent the civil engineering, all the things outside of the building and how to accommodate the sites and find and identify and tag the right site configurations. Below that's Kirk Viola. Kirk's not with me tonight. He is from Hickory, North Carolina, and he will serve as the structural engineer. Once we finally design a building, he'll design the footings and the bones that hold the building up to make sure that it is structurally sound and meets all the needs. That is the engineering side of the columns that we're looking at here. On the right-hand side, you're looking at more Stuart Cooper Newell people. So these are folks who will serve you from our office and in support roles. So I'm going to let Jody Jackson, who is the first name on that list, tell you a little bit about his role in the project.
Good evening. My name is Jody Jackson, and I've been in architecture with Stuart Cooper Newell for 12 years. I'll serve as your project manager on this project, and like Ken mentioned, we'll be in this project together from start tonight till the end of the project is over. You'll have to mess with us every single day But in addition to us, we have some other team members that will be working with us on this project. We got Kim Parton, which graduated with an architectural degree and has over 10 years of experience in architecture. Have Mr. Gary Sanchez, which has over 20 years in architectural experience and graduated with a degree. And Mr. Greg Scott, which has 9 years of experience in architecture and graduated with an architectural degree. All of us will work on your planning, schematic design, design development, and construction documents all through the process. And once we finally get to the construction phase, we have the last gentleman you see at the bottom, Mr. Ren Ramsey. He is 25 years experienced as a general contractor, which has been with our firm for over 5 years. And he brings a nice perspective to the group, and he looks after our interest and also your interest while he's out on site, making sure the GC is doing exactly what he's supposed to do, and he has a lot of hidden secrets that he calls them out on most of the time. So.
Thank you, Jody. So that's the team that we're proposing for this project. A little bit more about Stewart Cooper Newell. I mentioned a moment ago we've been in business since 1971. I hope you can look at me and tell I haven't been there since then, but I look more like it every day. We're made up of about 22 employees right now, 4 registered architects in the group. We've designed, studied, or assessed more than 1,000 facilities like this over the years for municipalities around not just the Southeast, but also nationwide. We have worked in 27 different states nationally on different projects, and happy to bring that expertise to you. The bottom bullet you're looking at there shows that we've established a national reputation for designing cost-effective, functional, maintenance-free, and durable facilities. That's a point that we really like to preach a lot about, because hopefully any good design firm could come in and design something that functions and something that looks nice on day one. But we don't want something that just does those. We want something that's going to last a long time and be as easy to maintain as possible as you go forward. The largest expense that any long municipal project will have is not in the initial construction cost, it's in the life cycle cost of maintenance and durability. So we're wanting to make sure that we're recommending and talking to you about systems, materials, and things in the building that will be easy to maintain and will be easily maintained over the life of the project and therefore extend that lifespan. You folks probably most commonly would recognize us from this project, which is in town, which is the Lewisville Fire Station, the West End Station. We did that just a few years ago, completed it. It was a very successful project. I'll talk to you a little bit about that project more as we move forward, but that's a public safety project, but we do much more than public safety. We're involved in a range of projects: recreation, churches, libraries, higher education, senior citizens, community centers, all sorts of projects that we're involved with. And for architects showing pictures of their projects, it's like you showing pictures of your grandkids. You could do it all night, right? But we won't do that tonight. We'll try to limit something that means to you. Included in that realm of work is recreation work, and so this is just a small listing of some of the recreation projects that we have, be it community centers, senior centers, full-blown gymnasiums and courts and things of that nature, and be glad to delve into any of those that you may have. I mentioned earlier that Ron Allman from Optima Engineering is with us, so Ron, if you would take just a moment and tell us about your role.
Hey, good evening. I'm Ron Allman with Optima Engineering. Just a little bit about our firm first. Our firm is 27 years old this year. We've been working with Ken and his group since day one. We actually had a relationship with him prior to starting our firm. Our partner and I started the firm in '92. So we've worked with these guys forever. We've done hundreds of projects together over the years, the Lewisville Fire Station being one of those. I'm a mechanical engineer by background. My partner's an electrical engineer. Within our firm, we provide mechanical, which is HVAC, electrical, power and lighting, plumbing, and fire protection. One thing that Ken didn't mention is we provide low voltage design. So we have certified designers on staff that also do telecom and AV, which I think will be very important in this facility as you look at your community center. So that's, do we have another slide here? So just a few of our projects. We've done a ton with these guys, but we've worked on senior centers, a lot of rec centers for counties. We do a lot of K-12 schoolwork, so we do a lot of classroom type stuff. Not knowing your program exactly, but we have a ton of experience in the type of program you're going to have in this building. And look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you, Ron. Also with us, as I'd already mentioned, is Brian Crutchfield. Brian, a little bit from you.
Thank you. Again, I'm Brian Crutchfield with Timmons Group. We're a full-service civil engineering, landscape architecture, and surveying firm. As Ken mentioned, civil engineering, we're handling all the stuff outside the building. So parking lot design, stormwater design, water, wastewater design. So we're trying to take care of all the hidden issues that may be or may not be present on the site. We have a local office in Greensboro, so we're on the west side of Greensboro. We've done a lot of work over the years in Forsyth County, some notable projects that are there on the screen, and we've worked on a lot of those with Stewart Cooper Newell, so we really enjoy working with them. As we understand it as well, we are a full-service firm, but you may not have a site already picked out or identified, so we can lend some value into the site selection and site identification process. As you're considering sites, we can compare and contrast those and try to help you understand what the cost difference could be for developing those sites. Do we have bad soils? Do we have any rock? Do we have utility issues? So we're going to really try to uncover some of those skeletons before you get too far down the road in selecting your site. We'll work closely with the architecture team to make sure we're test fitting those sites to make sure it can accommodate your program as well. We've worked on a number of community centers, both public and private, so we keep up to date fairly well on design trends and development trends. So when we're looking outside of your building, once we better understand your program, we can bring some good techniques and some recent trends to light, whether it be for site amenities, playgrounds, recreation fields, anything along those lines that you may want to incorporate into this facility. So we can help kind of plan ahead and coach you along a little bit to make some good decisions for your facility.
Thank you, Brian. I mentioned structural engineer Taylor and Viola. They're not with us tonight, but these are the folks who will design the bones to hold the building up. So we've worked with them for the last 20 years, and they do probably 90% of all of our structural engineering. So very comfortable with their ability to work on your project as well. Let's talk a little bit about design experience on these types of facilities. This is a project that I'm going to let Jody talk about because he was involved in it. Jody, come on around, please.
This project is the Burton Wells Senior Center. This was an original community center that was existing here on this side, and they wanted to do a 3,000 square foot addition for a senior living center. We designed this over off to the end there. I think the next picture. This end there, and it's a large multi-purpose space that they can utilize for many different activities, divided up the way they wanted to. It also includes kitchens and bathrooms. Some of the things that we tried to incorporate was some sustainability with the light from the outside. We maintained the low country architectural look on the outside using the materials that match the existing but were low maintenance.
Thank you, Jody. This is another facility in Gaston County. This is the community center here. I won't spend too much time on it, but most of the facility on the top of the plan already existed as the North Carolina Extension offices and some other support offices for the county. Everything that you see below here was added, so it added some additional craft space. It added the senior center project for the countywide senior center activities, some additional craft areas, exercise areas, a lot of different aspects to that was added to there. This is in a community in Hickory, North Carolina, a very low income community. The existing building that you see in the background was already there and had been there for well over 75 years as a community center, basically a large gymnasium. They needed to upgrade it. They needed to bring many more activities into the site. Some of the aspects like you're planning to add in this facility, some craft areas, some senior areas, some additional exercise areas into the facility. So it was a renovation of a lot of the existing spaces, upgrading and adding to some of the recreation spaces for them. This is just a simple diagram that shows this is the part of the building that existed from the beginning. We added some additional breakout meeting rooms, education rooms, teen rooms, workout rooms, and some drop-off areas, because it was an area where the underprivileged would be able to come in from the community, have access after school and into the evening so that they can have activities that would keep them busy as well. This is the Boys and Girls Club in Gastonia, North Carolina, a fairly large nonprofit organization. It had a fairly large floor plan, as you can see, which included a large full-court gymnasium and cross courts, a lot of the locker rooms associated with it, and then it had teen centers associated with that part of the recreation facilities, additional workout areas, computer labs areas for the kids to come in after school and have somewhere where they could have computer activities, also for the senior adults that would come in and have some separate computer activities as well. So a large variety of end users that use that facility, it brought them together under one roof, and so we're used to working with a large number of varying groups. This is a project that was originally the recreation center for Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and at some point just a few years ago, the city made a decision that they would turn over all of their recreation activities to the YMCA. So the YMCA basically came in, and we did a study on the facility that showed what renovations and interior additions would need to be made so that it could become a fully functional YMCA branch in that part of the county. This is another YMCA project down in Gaston County, and we did the study here that added all of the Olympic-sized swimming pool, the facilities outside of that for playgrounds and play areas and wet areas, and an additional gymnasium for racquetball and handball courts as well. So we're used to working with a lot of recreation facilities, which normally would be a component, some sort of a component in community centers. Not too far away in Stokesdale, North Carolina, a few years ago, we completed a recreation project, which was a development of a brand new park for Stokesdale, and then just a couple of years after that, we incorporated their new town hall / community center into that park itself. So it's part of what they have in Stokesdale, and some of you may be familiar with that. I mentioned to you I wanted to show you a case study, which is very similar to the project that you're talking about. It has some aspects to it. It's the Kings Mountain Community Center. This is the view of the center from the outside. This is located on the gateway coming in Highway 74 and 85 that splits there just west of Gastonia, and it's the gateway building coming into the town of Kings Mountain. So it is a fairly large facility. It was designed not only to accommodate the senior citizens, but also the community at large in that area. So it ended up being a fairly successful. Notice the covered walkways around the perimeter. I'll bring those to your attention again here in just a moment. But it was a fairly successful project. It was a very tight site. Even though the last photo I showed you did not look that tight, it was fairly tight, as you can see from the parameters of the site that we're looking at here. So it was set up so that the front entry, the public entry with parking there, the staff parking along the rear, we did, and I'll show you in a moment, an expansion. We did an expansion on the back of the building later, and so it was designed so that it could easily be expanded. That's one of the things that we try to do for all of our clients, is look at not only what today's needs are, but how you would grow the facility in the future. Any municipal facility over a lifespan, you expect to have a lifespan of at least 50 to 75 years on them. It's going to grow, it's going to expand more than likely during that lifespan. So our goal, our responsibility is to think about how that growth will take place, and that's what we did in this facility. I'll show you the floor plan in a moment, but the first part of this was built towards the front, and then the second part was added later. The reason you see the arrows going around, they really wanted to have some exterior exercise areas for the seniors, a walking trail specifically, but because the number of parking spaces they had would not accommodate also a walking track on the facility, we designed it and laid it out in such a way so that if you follow the arrows all the way around in good weather, that made a 1/4 mile track for them. So they were able to get the exercise in during the middle of the day when there's less traffic activities going on in that. Keep that in mind, because I'll mention that on the inside of the building. This is the first phase of that project. Those covered canopies and walkways that I mentioned around the perimeter, the front entry and a large 2-story grand space I'll show you pictures of there. This is a large community multipurpose room. The Rotary Club and the Optimist Clubs meet there regularly for their luncheons. It's got a large kitchen and dining room, a commercial kitchen and dining room, the toilet facilities for it, the administrative spaces, and then surrounding that is the craft spaces. Note that this corridor at the back goes all the way against the exterior wall in the phase 1 of construction. That's part of that future expansion plan that I mentioned. I'll show you a plan in a moment where we finished adding to that just a couple of years ago, but notice all the doorways and windowways in that back wall was set up so that we went ahead and thought where all those extra rooms would occur so that all they would need to do is add that on and the openings would already be in place for those future activities. This is the floor plan of the finished space itself, so everything I just showed you is in the yellow, and then above that is the addition that took place beyond that. So they added some additional craft and multipurpose rooms, so you get an idea here as I look at some of what was added to these spaces. You get an idea of some of the activities: dining, classrooms, kitchens, multipurpose, computer labs, exercise, crafts areas, game rooms, library, administration spaces. You remember the quarter-mile track that I mentioned on the outside of the building? Well, in case of inclement weather, you can see we designed a corridor that went all the way around the interior of the space so that in inclement or cold weather, they had a 1/16 of a mile walking track on the inside of the building, so that any time of the year, outside or inside, they have the ability to have good exercise walking areas for that facility. This is just a few interior shots of that. This is that 2-story lobby at the front. The local art guild got together and designed the stained glass piece that would go in the front of it that reflected back on the history of Kings Mountain so that it becomes something that's very personalized to your facility as you move forward. The recreation areas, even in the front lobby, a little retail shop so they could sell some of the goods that they would produce in the craft areas. Some of the classroom and dining areas that have multi-purpose activities. You notice the demountable walls that can break these into multi-use spaces. And some of the recreation or craft areas. Notice the floor finishes, paying attention to what we need to do in areas that are prone to get messy, is go ahead and put sealed concrete in those areas so that it's easy to maintain, easy to clean, and then some higher end recreation areas for them in the exercise areas as well. Let's talk for a little bit about your project. There are some specific things that have previously been discussed that we want to make sure are addressed as we move forward in your project. One of those is designing a building that's flexible for the internal use of the space. As I have continued to mention, we want to design for the future, not just today, and the flexibility of today. So looking at example spaces that can be used for many different purposes. It's disadvantage oftentimes, as high as construction costs have gotten, to build a space that is dedicated to one activity that may only be used once or twice a week. So you want to develop and design spaces that can be multi-used, that used on multiple occasions for many different things. So the ability to set up a room in many different areas. You notice the demountable wall that would divide this room up into different activities. Also, here is a room that has currently being used as a weight room or exercise room, but you'll also notice the demountable wall that can break that into 2 rooms, or easily, if they decide in 3 or 5 or 10 years to use that space for something completely besides exercise room, they've got the ability to break that room up and use it for multiple different activities. Same thing is true on spaces that were used like we're sitting in tonight, a space that is flexible use for meetings, for other activities that take place. This is a large room that can be set up for meetings, for training activities. If you start noticing around the walls of the room, there's also IT and communication cabling put in place so that in this case, this municipality could use this room as a secondary EOC, Emergency Operations Center, if they needed to, by simply having the activities already in place and the wiring in place so that they can add those monitors and different things in it. This is another example of a large room that's a multi-purpose room, and you'll notice the demountable wall that separates a conference room from the larger room itself. So you've got lots of flexibility on how you can set up these rooms and reconfigure them as you move forward. Example again is thinking about floor finishes. If it's an area where recreation or dirty activities are likely to occur, we like to use a lot of the polished concrete floors. It's very difficult to damage those floors. It can be done if you really try, but it's difficult to do that. So you don't have the carpet and the stripping and the waxing and the things necessary to keep those rooms up and going, and rooms that can be used for meeting or auditoriums as well. Also using smaller spaces, going into the areas and using smaller spaces. Some of the more modern material samples that we're looking at here, for instance, this flooring is what's called luxury vinyl tile. It's a very high-use product that's out there now. Doesn't require stripping and waxing. You just simply damp mop it, and you're able to keep it in good shape as you move forward. So we're here to talk to you about what the great recommendations for floor finishes, wall finishes, exterior materials would be, and what the cost value savings for those would be. Another thing that we wanted to talk about was providing electrical and telecommunication wiring systems that are flexible and expandable, and how that would work in your facility. Here's a few examples. We work with Optima oftentimes on much more complicated communication facilities. We do 911 facilities with them and EOCs around the southeast as well. So bringing that expertise to you helps us to set up a building that is much more flexible. Ron, you want to address a moment on that?
Yeah. One thing I'd say is, in the flexibility, it goes with the air conditioning system as well. And you think about a room like this that's full of people tonight, and on Tuesday at lunch there may be 6 people in here. So we'll design a system with variable capacity, because if we sized it for this large group, you'd have humidity problems when you have the small groups. So we design a variable system that's going to meet any kind of need in the space. Same with lighting controls, flexible lighting sequences and controls so that you can light it any way you want to. Some of the flexibility that I think Ken was leading to here, on day one it's really simple to put conduit in a building to a place where you may need wire or telecom cabling in the future. So if we can plan those spaces so we have pathways for that future cabling, your future costs are minimized if that space changes or becomes something different, or the use becomes different in the future.
And that raceway that I had the seniors running around the building in before, that's a good place to start putting cabling trays, so you would always have access to tie in whatever room you need to in the future as well. One of the things that we try to look at as well is the energy efficiency of the building. You haven't requested, or at least I haven't heard yet, that this facility be a LEED facility, and we certainly have done a lot of LEED facilities over the years. It seems that the trend of getting LEED certification has declined over the last decade or so. Not so much that sustainability is not important, but that, for instance, the building codes, the energy codes, and the thermal envelopes of the building have really increased to the point that most of the time, if you meet today's building codes, you're about halfway to LEED already. So you've incorporated a lot of sustainability, and we do as well. But we like to preach a lot about sustainability that makes sense. For instance, I showed you a moment ago a concrete floor in some recreation areas or some craft areas. You would not want to go in and put cork floors, which is a highly sustainable element, in those floors. That would not get along well with the kind of activities that go in it. We want to talk to you about what products make sense, how it makes sense, and what is the financial payback of the sustainable elements that we're looking at. I'll give you a good example of that. We use a lot and oftentimes recommend solar hot water heaters. That's the panels that go up on the roof or on the ground, and they will heat the hot water in the building or supplement that heated water. That has typically a very short payback, less than 10-year payback associated with that. The photovoltaic energy producing panels, they have a very long payback period associated with them. Oftentimes the equipment will fail before you finish paying for it. So unless you're of an organization, a private organization that gets a tax credit associated with that, oftentimes photovoltaic doesn't make sense. But we're here to talk about the pros and cons of all that and work in for you the sustainable elements into the building. Ron, I'm bringing you back up again, talk about some of these sustainability. Make your money's worth.
Yeah. So sustainable to us, Ken is correct. LEED has sort of faded away over the years. I think it did a good thing in our industry, our business. It pushed us all to think that way. It did improve the codes. It improved the way we designed. Without knowing what your building is going to be, what size, and what's going in it exactly, it's hard to say what that system needs to be. But we'll look at a system that's going to last and operate efficiently for a long period of time. The first cost, and I think Ken alluded to this earlier, the first cost is minimal compared to what it costs to own your building for a lifetime. So we're going to design a system, and we'll look at life cycle costs. We're going to design a system for you that will be your lowest investment over a 30 to 50 year period of time. We're going to design you a system that's going to last. There's a lot of things we can do. The solar energy is one thing we can do, but there's a lot of things without going to that extreme. Lighting controls I mentioned earlier, the type of lighting. LED lighting is common now. 5 years ago it was too expensive. Now we would do this whole building in LED lighting, which just cuts the lighting wattage in a building from 2 watts a square foot to 0.6 watts a square foot or even lower. So that translates to air conditioning costs because it lowers your air conditioning load as well. So there's just lots of things like that that we've learned over the years that we can implement to make this a very sustainable building from an energy standpoint.
Thank you, sir. All right, create a building that's compatible with the character of Lewisville. So, again, using the Lewisville Fire Station as a goal, when this station was first being discussed and talked about, as you know, the community that it went in had a lot of equestrian characteristics to it, had a lot of rural characteristics that they wanted to maintain. We actually met with the community prior to starting the design process itself to make sure that we were accomplishing that. So we had multiple meetings with the fire department, had multiple meetings with the public activities so that we bring in charrettes. We're able to sit down with the community, hear from the community what their goals and concerns are, making sure that we're meeting and matching those activities as best as the budget will allow them to be met. And that's one of the things that we serve as, is to be able to put a barometer of budget against every request that goes out there so that we can all together evaluate, reach a consensus of what the goals are and evaluate what that means to the project and whether that's doable or not. For the Lewisville Fire Station, it meant the materials, the forms of the building. This was the first fire station that we had worked on after 300 plus fire stations that had what looked like barn doors instead of the typical overhead doors for us. So it was a facility that matched the community that it fit in, and we do that quite often depending on where the community is. It can be a completely different aesthetic for that. Jody, you want to talk a little bit about Holden?
As Ken mentioned, we tried to do on the outside what we do on the inside, maximize the look to match what you want to see every day as you ride down the road. Here are 2 examples of how we did that with Holden Beach in the top corner. We used a low roof design. We used hurricane-proof shutters and tried to match the community and use materials that were favorable in coastal climates. The bottom picture down here shows a fire station in Danville, Virginia. There's a backstory concerning this station, but there were demolished buildings over a block and a half that they wanted to put this fire station on. It also had a stream that ran through the lot. So what they did was take the materials from the demolished buildings, salvage them, and started reusing them in this new station. Now this is a 4-bay, 26,000 square foot fire station where they took some of the cobblestone from the street and implemented it in this lobby museum that's in the front of the fire station. You can see some of the timber wood that was used on the old buildings that they restored and put inside this building, along with some of the reclaimed brick. We also did a fire station down in Beaufort, North Carolina, and going with the aesthetics of the local town, they wanted something that looked similar to what the old town looked like. So with the lot selection, we started laying out the floor plan and the spaces, and then once we gathered that information, we were able to start doing the elevations and mimic some of the characteristics of the old town, with the large tower in front, the arched windows, and the brick versus the hardy plank and metal siding veneer. So we did some schematic designs, as we will with you guys, and then eventually came up with a final rendering, and then as you can see, the final product come right along just behind it, with the focal point being that large tower similar to their old town view.
Thank you, sir. That kind of shows you the process we use to make sure that we are accomplishing the community's goals as we move forward, whether it's aesthetics or function itself. Let's talk a little bit about your project and the budget, because ultimately, no matter how big our dreams are or your dreams may be, and if hopefully they meld together, it's going to take money to do it. And we need to make sure that we're managing that budget as much as possible. For the last 5 years or so, the construction costs have really escalated in large capacity compared to what they were being even when we did the Lewisville Fire Station. So we've got to make sure that we're measuring that. We are receiving bids on public municipal projects multiple times per month each month. And so we're able to track what's going on in the bidding climate, and as we go through the design process, hopefully more accurately label for you what we anticipate your budget would be for whatever is being requested. But controlling that budget is important. Your project, this is a diagram we use a lot that talks about what all goes in to make your project. Your building has got to take into consideration not just budget, but the aesthetics, the consensus of the people that are going to be operating in it and around it, operations and function, the schedule of when it needs to be completed. All of those things go together to make a successful project for you, but that budget tends to be the one that controls the most oftentimes, is to make sure that it is something that you can afford to build. I'll use the example of the Kings Mountain Center again to tell you how we're successful normally at doing that. I mentioned before that the first phase of the building was what you see in yellow and the walkway around it. So when we bid that project, we put it together with multiple what's called alternate bids. That means is that we can design the basic building and make sure that we're getting bids on those, but then any upgrades that you might want, we'll take an extra price from the general contractor on bid day to get that extra price. And then if the bids come in at a good number, you're able to pick and choose some of the upgrades to the facility. For example, that covered walkway that you remember seeing around this, which helps to beautify the outside of the building, it was designed as an alternate bid. The basic box of the building itself was the base bid. So we got an extra price on bid day for those covered walkways, and they were able to afford them because the prices came in well. If they had not been able to afford them on bid day, they still could have come. They was designed already. They could come back a year, 2 years, 5 years later and add it when the time comes. I also mentioned that I didn't show you before, but this large room in the middle, we went ahead and designed the structure for a very large 2-story folding wall system, a soundproof folding, so they could break that large room into 2 smaller rooms and use it for 2 activities. Those panels are very expensive, so we took those panels as an ad alternate. Would it have been the end of the world if they couldn't afford the panels on day one? It was nice to have them, and they did afford them, but that way it didn't stop the project because the project came in over budget. So we're used to looking at that and then designing that back portion of the building so that it could easily be added at a later point in time. That's some of the ways that we work with you to make sure that on bid day you're going to have a project that you can afford to build and move forward with. Summary and references. Here's again just a few of the people. Chief Alderman, who was at the Lewisville Fire Station back at the time. I kept showing you the Kings Mountain projects. Mr. Jimmy Maney, who was the city manager at that time on those projects, he'll be glad to talk to you. And Mr. Eric Hilton nearby, not too far away in Burlington, so we can provide you dozens and dozens and have given you other references as well. Here's where I tell you what I told you. Okay, thank you for not going to sleep on me, by the way. That's a great thing, good sign. So hopefully we have talked to you about and shown you that the team all together has looked at and would look at the energy efficiency capabilities of the project. Hopefully we've shown you that we've got a philosophy of listening. We're not going to come in and present our ideas to you and say you need to accept these ideas. We want to pull the ideas out of you and design based on it. The key of a good architect is someone who can listen very well. And so we want to make sure that we are those folks who listen very well. We've got a proven history of delivering projects on time and on budget. In 2009 and 2010, that wasn't hard to do because it was a crashed economy and everything came in under budget there. But in recent times, it's more difficult to make that happen, but we've been successful at making that happen, and you can see that in some of our other projects. We've got the time and resources available to devote to your project. The team that you're looking at here and all the folks in my office, we're actually finishing up several large projects right now. And so we've got some added capacity in our office right now where if you wanted to start next week, we could start next week. We're ready to move forward. We've got the ability and the horsepower to drive those projects and move forward with it as well. You've got a design team that has worked together for many, many years. There's nothing new that we've got to learn from them or they've got to learn from us. So we're here to support your project as we go forward. And the bottom line is we really want to be your design team. It's a great project. It's a great building type. We love the fact that there's a lot of community interest and activity into it. That means it's going to be an exciting project and ready to move forward with. So with that being said, I will be quiet long enough to let you ask any questions that you may have. Is it okay to go ahead and start taking questions?
I think it'd be perfect.
Okay.
We'll pass this around if you'll
I
talk into
can
this.
yell.
Yeah.
He made me use a mic, so you've got to use one too, right?
Okay. Educate me. You talked about LEED, L-E-E-D.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with that. Would you tell me what that means?
Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. That is a rating system that they put in place, it's been at least 30 years ago now that they started that. It became very popular about 2 decades ago. So what that means is that the design team and the construction methods put in place are methods that will help certify and guarantee that you have designed and built a sustainable project. So it goes to many of the things that we talked about, the recycled content of the flooring. Some things that made a lot of sense, some things that didn't make so much sense. But the bottom line is it would be certified. There would be a third-party national organization that would come in and certify the design and the construction to say, yes, you have a sustainable building. You're still getting, as we mentioned earlier, a good sustainable building now, just not the plaque hanging on the wall. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay, great.
One last quick one.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a site yet?
No, sir. That's part of our responsibility is to help work with your group to make sure that you've got a site that will satisfy you. We're here to help you evaluate all of the sites under consideration and to make sure we rule which ones are best and which ones are not.
Thank you.
John, do you have a hand up? I'm fighting a cold. Do I really want to breathe into that? I'll hold it away from you. I'll be okay. They can hear me. Well, folks at home, I'd like to hear you. So I love the multifunctional thoughts and the process that you employ, and the flexibility both inside and outside. Very, very important. Very good. I just want to clarify one thing. In using the parking area as a de facto track around the building, I'm assuming that wasn't part of your multifunctional theme that you would want to employ, and that was only because you were constrained due to the site.
That is correct. It's not something we would typically recommend, and they control that activity so that there's high vehicular traffic first thing in the mornings, and then around noon, and then later in the afternoon. So they control that so that there's not any folks out there walking around in the parking lot during the normal course of those busy times. Yes, sir. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, otherwise we'd have to put the ambulance squad right next to it.
Yes, sir. Well, depending on how serious we get about the exercise, and we may need to do that too. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Here. Hi, thank you
Thank
for
you.
your presentation. So with building envelopes being so tight these days, where in your process can you speak to material specifications as it relates to low VOCs, the volatile organic compounds?
So, Ron, you're going to join me on this answer, okay? Well, there's 2 components. There's multiple, more than 2 components to that. One is the selection of the materials, like with the VOCs that you're referring to. So, one of the things that Ron mentioned LEED did do to the industry is it changed a lot of the things that are now available to you. So you would have a lot of the dangerous VOCs associated with carpet glues and adhesives, wallpaper glue and adhesives. Those are things that over the last 10 to 20 years, the manufacturers, because of the concern from that, have gone to water-based products more than VOC-based products. And so much of that is not even available anymore. But we make sure that whatever is still available, that we're evaluating those specifications on those manufacturer details and not utilizing that as well. Now that it also goes towards the mechanical systems as well, so that's where Ron comes in.
Yeah, so in the mechanical systems, we'll design ventilation into the system so that we're bringing outside air in all the time. So you're introducing outside air into the building to keep a fresh environment inside the building. One of LEED's requirements back in the day was actually to flush the building when you opened it. and we would actually flush the building with outside air for a period of 2 weeks, basically. Not necessary, especially with today's materials. But the mechanical system, the HVAC system, will constantly monitor the air quality and introduce outside air to keep the building clean.
Did that answer your question? Okay, great. Any others? Yes, sir, you again.
I'm busy. I think you used the term demountable walls.
Yes, sir.
Is that different than a folding wall?
How that, now I'm back on, okay. Normally, those are used interchangeably. The demountable wall normally in the industry is a wall that is not opened and closed on a regular basis. It's a wall like you would use for an office upfit, so they would come in and set that up for a year or 10 years at a time, but it's in space that could turn this room, for instance, into 20 offices with demountable walls. The movable walls are the ones that I was mostly showing you that could easily be closed and opened on a regular basis. Do you have a question? Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions, actually.
I'd like to know a little bit about your decision-making, in the sense that right now you talk about your pipeline being full of projects. So in that situation, if we were to get online with you, will it stress your pipeline, or will it be, will we be way down the pipeline?
Well, let me correct, because I must have said something incorrectly. What I meant to say is that we are finishing projects right now, so our pipeline is opening up. We've got lots of extra capacity at this moment, which is very unusual in today's construction and design climate, so we're looking forward to take advantage of that.
As I said at the beginning of this meeting, the second page, please flip the first page over. This group is called ADW, so write them in on the top of the second page or the second evaluation form. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just say it again. This is ADW. They are our second group to make presentation this evening. Like the first group, expect 45 minutes of presentation and up to 30 minutes of questions and answers following that. And then again, as I said at the very beginning, once we conclude this evening, if everyone who is filling out an evaluation sheet could drop it in the wicker basket at the back at the table before they're on their way out the door, I'd appreciate it. And that's all I've got. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Jim Powell, who is going to make his own introductions.
Thank you, Hank. First of all, we want to thank you for shortlisting our firm and allowing us to be here to make this presentation. As Hank said, we are ADW Architects, and actually an excellent group of consulting engineers are part of our team. We always like to start by telling you a little bit about ourselves and our company. So we'll go to the first slide. ADW Architects, we've been in business since 1977. We're a long-standing firm, very stable firm, been around a long time. We have one office with a staff of 42 people, including 21 licensed architects. Now, if you know anything about architectural firms, this right here is a very, very high ratio. Basically, 1 out of every 2 people in our office is a licensed architect. Mike, let's go to the next slide, because it really says something about our firm. In Charlotte, there are a lot of big firms, hundreds of people. We have 42 people, but we're actually ranked number 4 as the 4th largest Charlotte architectural firm when ranked by the number of local licensed architects on staff. Now, why is that important to you? It's important to us, but it's also important, we think, for our clients, because we believe the best projects are the ones that combine excellent design with thorough, well-coordinated construction documents completed by licensed architects. It's really that simple, and that's what it boils down to. All right, we'll go back to a little bit about ourselves. We do specialize in public sector architecture. We've completed over 75 public sector projects. Our office is organized into design teams, and probably the most important part of this slide that's up here right now is this part right here. Each design team stays consistent from start to finish. And the reason that's important, it's a part of our philosophy, is we want you to know that the people you start with are the people you're going to end with on a project. It's very important for continuity and for coordination throughout the project. That's part of the reason why the people are here tonight from our firm, because these are the people that you'll be working with. Okay, we'll move on to The reason I can say that, because a lot of times you come up here and say you're going to end with the ones you start with. Well, Jim, how can you be confident in that? Is that we have a core group of 12 people in our office that focus on all our public sector projects. And the highlighted number here are the years that they've been with ADW. As you can see, we have an excellent employee retention in our office. We have good people, treat them well, they work on great projects, and so we keep our people a long time. So that's why we can say you'll be ending with the people that you start with. All right, now a little bit about us. My name is Jim Powell. I'm a managing principal with the firm. I've been with the firm for over 33 years. I am the principal in our firm who handles all of our public sector work. And as such, my role is quality control from start to finish. But actually, in my previous years with ADW, I was also our director of design. And what that means is that as the managing principal, I'm very involved with the actual design of all of my projects. A lot of that is with the upfront work, with the programming, the schematic design, the charrettes, things like that. Community engagement is the part that I sort of specialize on the front end. Okay?
And I'm Mike Esposito. I've been with ADW for a little bit over 21 years, and I'm a principal with ADW. And I would be, as Jim mentioned, the project architect from start to finish. And so basically from schematic design through construction.
Hi, I'm Crystal Boston. I'm Director of Interior Design. I've been with ADW for 19 years, and my role is to help you select the best finishes and products for the interior of the building, as well as furniture. I've done lots of furniture projects, and I'm well-versed in pre-negotiated contracts.
I'm John Cappers. I've been with ADW Architects for almost 25 years now. I am the Director of Construction Administration, which means I'm the guy that goes out to the job sites and checks up on the job during construction.
Ron doesn't get to go yet. All right, next slide, please. All right, as I said before, we have a group of excellent consulting engineers. Some of you may or may not know, but most architectural firms do not have engineering in-house. We have consultants that we work with. We create relationships with these consultants, so a lot of the times we'll work with the same consultants for many different projects. That is the case with this group here. Our site civil engineering landscape architecture group is Timmons Group. Excellent firm, been around a long time, longer actually than our firm, 65 years, very large firm. They have 14 offices. They have 4 offices in North Carolina. We, as ADW, work with pretty much 2 of those offices, the Greensboro office, close by, and also the Charlotte office. We've done many projects with them. As a matter of fact, we just completed 2 projects in Winston-Salem with them just recently. Structural engineering consultant would be Stewart Engineering, excellent structural engineering firm. Once again, a pretty big firm. They have 3 offices, Charlotte, Durham, and Raleigh. We pretty much work with their Charlotte firm. Other item of note, they are a minority-owned, certified, what's called HUB firm. We've actually worked with them for, gosh, probably over 15 years, and as it says there, over 80 projects. Now, I'm going to let Ron talk, who, as I know, you've already heard from. So I've told him he has to say something different and witty.
So Mayor Horn told me that I have the hard part of the project, so start with that. So I'm Ron Allman again, for those of you who don't remember, Vice President of Optima. I guess something I didn't say earlier, we do have 2 offices. Our headquarters is Charlotte, and that's where we started. That's we have about 60 people in Charlotte. We have a Raleigh office as well that's about 4.5 years old, and we have 15 people there. And we do offer a full range of services, and we've worked with Jim, and Mike is also a farmer. He grows jalapeno peppers, just a little side note. But so I've worked with these guys forever, and I know a lot about them. They're a great group of people to work with.
Thank you, Ron. I'll ask you later what he said in the first interview, okay? All right, let's go on. We always also like to tell you a little bit about our design philosophy. Our philosophy actually is a firm, because I think that shapes who we are and how we work as a firm. First thing, as you will see, there we go. Basically, our philosophy can be summed up in 3 words: interactive, participatory, and consensus building. Now, what this means is if you're looking for the kind of firm that's going to come in, meet with your stakeholder groups, get the information, go back to our office, and then come back in about 30 days and say, here you are. Do you like it? That's absolutely not who we are. It simply is not who we are. The way we operate is we truly, truly want to get to know you and get to know your project and let the solutions, the design solutions, and the project flow from understanding your goals and objectives. It has to start that way. This is not an ADW project. This is your project. And so we, as architects, have to get to know you, your history, the history to this project, the history to all of the meetings that you've had to this point. It's very, very important to us. We work collaboratively, listening and leading and communicating effectively. We provide consistent project team personnel. We talked about that one. We customize our design for each project. That's very, very important. A community center for you is going to be different from a community center for a town right down the road. You're going to see a lot of community centers here, but your community center will not be that. It won't look like that. It won't house the same things. Every design needs to be different because it needs to be born out of your goals and objectives, your interests, and what you want the building to look like. Very important. We design buildings that are energy efficient. Very important today, but it's actually always been important, and that's part of the reason why we have Ron on board. Very good at that. We believe in proactive construction administration. John's going to talk about that a little bit later on. Once again, I get to this point of probably the most important part of this slide is this last one right here. We are committed to meeting budget requirements. And really what that means is that it doesn't matter when we finish how great the building looks on the outside or how great it works on the inside in terms of functionally. If we don't meet the budget and we can't get this built, we simply haven't done our job. It comes down to that. And so one of the things you would hear from us throughout the project, at each step in the project, is talking about budget. Well, we'll talk, actually, let's go on to the next slide. How we do that is that we have a fantastic relationship with another member of our team who I didn't mention before, and that is Rutherford & Associates Cost Estimators. We worked with them for over 15 years. They're a cost estimating company that specializes in public sector projects. And Richard, who we work with, understands how we design. He understands basically, probably sometimes better than us, the costs of what we're designing. So what that means for us, and as some of you may know, a project will go through many stages. They'll go through schematic design, design development, and then construction documents, all of these phases before it's bid. And typically you don't know your cost until it's bid, till a contractor tells you what your building costs. So we have to give you cost estimates along the way. So that's what Richard helps us with. He's very good at it, but the important part of it is right here. We use this cost information to help the design team and owner make design decisions to keep the project within budget. So we come up with this great design. We give it to Richard. He takes a look at it. He does his numbers, and he gives us a cost estimate. We come back to you, and we say either we're over budget, we probably need to trim some things, let's talk about that, or we're under budget, how should we proceed? And we discuss that together. But there's these checks and balances along the way with the idea that when it comes time to bid, we've done our due diligence, we've done everything we can to know that on bid day, we're going to be within budget. Okay? We're going to move on and tell you a little bit about our experience. The first slide tells you a little bit about all of our public building experience. As I said before, over 75 public buildings in our history of our company, very experienced in all types of public buildings. Certainly community centers, but also everything from town, city halls, police, fire, all public safety, libraries, which aren't even up there, K-12, community college, higher education, many, many different ones. And what that means is that we understand the process to public projects. We understand what it takes to take a public project from its inception all the way through construction, rules, regulations, all the things that public projects have to follow, public bid laws, things like that. So, all right, we're going to move on. Mike's going to take us through some of our community centers in Mecklenburg County.
Yeah, this is a Hickory Grove Recreation Community Center. And the idea behind this project was a shared use facility with Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. It had a full-size high school gymnasium, In addition, it had a children's room, multi-purpose rooms, and also office and support spaces that were directly available to the community. It had its own separate entrance also. So this facility could also be used on weekends and after hours when the school was closed down. That's they had it secured so that it was a separate entry. They could, but during the day they were able to do training and use the multi-purpose rooms separately from the rest of the facility. The next was the Berwick Recreation Community Center. Again, similar type program where full-size gym, high school gym, and then it also had breakout spaces, multi-purpose. In addition, it also had movable partition walls so they could further break down those spaces and use them for different activities. This project was with Charlotte Mecklenburg Parks and Rec. It's a community center. It was just recently finished last year. And the community center was something that the community really got behind and supported, and it's been well received. Some of the design for it, the angle of the building and the glass took advantage of probably one of the best views of the Charlotte skyline that you can see down in this right corner. It's just amazing. You go around Charlotte and you see these individual views and you see this park and you just didn't realize there was that view. And the community really uses this space. In fact, it's so booked up that there's like a waiting list to get into this place. So it turned out really good for the community.
This is another one of, sort of as Mike pointed out, these combination recreation community centers where the school system has worked with Parks and Rec and the county to create these facilities. But this one was really different. This one's the Tom Sykes Recreation Community Center. Was within an elementary school in the historic neighborhood of Dilworth. When we got on board this project, they had problems getting this going. Basically, the county and Parks and Rec and the school system, it had just fallen flat. They had 7 different stakeholders, and they could not gain consensus. They had the community parents, of course, Park and Rec. They had the neighborhood association of right around there, Dilworth. They had the Historic Commission because it was a historic area. They also had the Charlotte Junior Soccer League because there were 5 competition soccer fields there. Dilworth Tennis Association, 6 competition tennis courts there. And then, of course, the school system and staff. And they came to us and they said, can you guys help us work through a charrette program, a programming process to try to build some consensus? I will tell you, it was absolutely wonderful. It was truly a good process. The next slide shows kind of what we did, and it's sort of become a way that we operate when we're trying to gain consensus in projects like this. Now, I know you've done a lot of good work, so you may have already gained consensus and everything might be good to go. We don't know the full details. But if not, I just want to tell you a little bit about our process, because it obviously can be tweaked and changed. But we call it our Building Consensus Programming Workshop process. Basically, the first step is to bring the architect on board. So that's you're on your way there. But once the architect gets on board, it's important for us to meet with the individual stakeholder groups. And when I say this, I don't mean as big in a group. I mean all the stakeholder groups. I mean individually, and that was really important on the Tom Sykes project, because we needed to understand where everybody was coming from in terms of their needs and their desires for that facility. And we wanted to hear it in a setting where were not other people who might feel differently. We wanted to get their side of the story, so to speak. We then review potential building sites, because that's another big component to this. You may have a site, you may have a number of sites, and so understanding site parameters is also very important. The next, we need to review the budget, where you're heading with that. You may not know for sure, but we need to have an idea of that. So you kind of get the feeling that we're sort of working with the puzzle pieces. We've got to understand the puzzle pieces. So we take that back to our office, and we create a first draft of what we call a building program with options. A building program is simply a listing of the spaces that we think you're going to want in there and the sizes for those spaces. So it identifies the overall size of the facility. We call it a draft program because step 3 is where all the heavy lifting gets done. That's where we bring the stakeholder groups together. And we review the options together with the stakeholder groups. How do we do that? Number 1, we discuss the pros and cons to each option openly. Very important. We've identified a lot of those pros and cons already when we come to this meeting. We discuss preliminary site impacts to each option. You'd be surprised how many concepts and how many things that might go in a building once you start looking at actual sites may or may not be able to fit or be on that site. And number 3, we discuss preliminary cost for each option. Because once again, some things you might want to do, but once we start talking about cost, maybe it's not exactly in the program. So we talk about all of these things, and the wonderful thing that happens is number 4, together, not just ADW, together the team starts to see the best option. The best analogy, I think, is the funnel. You've got a funnel. You've got all the puzzle pieces. You've got site. You've got costs, pros and cons, and you work together, and out of the bottom typically comes a very good option. And the best part about it is that it builds consensus. When you come to that final option, the best option, everybody understands why. Because they've seen the pros and cons. They understand why we're now building this building of this square footage that has this room and this room, but doesn't have this room or this space. And so it's a real building consensus process. Okay? We'll move on. That particular project here was sort of the result. It was in a historic neighborhood, so you can see some of the historic styling there. That was the gym on the top floor, and then a lot of the recreation space, community space, was on the lower floor. Similar to the others, it had little differences here. It did have performance arts rooms, music rooms, dance rooms, children's rooms, other multi-purpose rooms, and of course it had the fields, tennis courts, recreation fields. So this is a wonderful center. It's got so many different things, and through creative time in terms of the programming and the times these things are used, it is truly used by the neighborhood. So, all right, we'll move on to another interesting project. This was also in Mecklenburg County, and it's located at a local park, Colonel Francis Beatty Park. This is Lake Point Hall Community Building, and as you can probably imagine by its name, it's located right on a lake in one of their parks. This building is, the last time I checked, was the highest used rental building for the community of all the park system in Charlotte. It's absolutely been wonderful. It's got a multi-purpose room for meetings, conferences, and wedding receptions, and that's probably one of the reasons why it's used. It's got an exterior plaza and trellis area for weddings right out by the lake, and then you roll right into this space for your wedding reception. It's been absolutely fantastic. Storage, support spaces, stone fireplace, so a wonderful community center. And something we'll talk about later, but I want you to kind of notice when you see these, a totally different aesthetic. Because the aesthetics on the outside are truly related to the inside and to what's needed for that particular project. Okay, this was just outside of Charlotte, Bell Johnston Community Center, a number of years ago, but this one was sort of more traditional in that gymnasium, multi-purpose rooms with art classes, cooking, fitness, and then office and support space. Move on to the next one. Some of the most interesting projects, unfortunately, never get built. We as architects go through that probably more often than we'd like. This was a community center for the town of Chadbourne, which is in the southeast part of North Carolina, kind of a depressed area, and the idea was that they wanted to put a community center in the downtown area, right along a rail line, but as part of sort of an urban renewal project. Did not get built. They were trying to get USDA funding. That didn't come through. But it was a great space. It consisted of pre- and post-function gathering space, meeting conference rooms, computer lab, job training rooms, had a seniors room, kitchen, and then offices and support. Next slide shows a little bit more about the design. Very interesting in that the pre- and post-function space worked right off of all the meeting space, so that whether it's a large group or a small group, when you come in and out, you had that sort of pre- and post-function waiting, discussing, gathering, actually shown pretty well here in the interior rendering. So you can see sort of that space outside of the rooms. This was all along the main street, so you got sort of your public side, more formal side right here with all the glass on the main street. And that was important to them, so that people could see what was going on in the community center with all this glass and Main Street being right out here. But we also designed the opposite of that, which was in the back, the more private area, sort of a private courtyard with bench seating and a fountain, and all of the spaces sort of worked around that. We had more training and computer rooms back here, and even the office spaces back here. The outside, once again, as I mentioned before, reflected what they wanted for their community. This was a big rail community, a train community. The actual rail line parallels this road right here. So we harken back to some of the traditional train station forms, but yet they didn't want something really traditional. They wanted an eye to the future. So you got sort of this transitional feel of sort of the train station looking to the future. Okay, another one was for Bessemer City Community Center. Another one where they were going after USDA funding, but that didn't come through, and the cost was just too much for them to move forward. It was a 2-level facility. You entered on the top level with your lobby. You had a series of multi-purpose rooms up here, and then on that level you could go out and look down into a gymnasium. There was actually a track that went around that right there that connected back to the main level right here. Catering, concessions, kitchen, which worked well with the different multi-purpose rooms. Dining was envisioned right here. The bottom floor was the gymnasium, and it was very multi-purpose, not only for athletics, but it was also set up with a performance, sort of a performance drama prop storage, an area with a stage right here, and then the certain storage rooms, meeting rooms, and all of these support facilities for any function that you could have in that gymnasium space. Now, once again, the exterior, different from all the others. Bessemer City is big into textiles, or they were, and they have a lot of old textile buildings. And so the concept there and what they wanted was a building that would sort of harken back to the feel of an old textile mill with the tower and the arched windows and the use of brick and the detailing. So that was important to them. Okay, Mike's going to tell us a little bit about some of our exciting work that we've been doing with our faith-based part of our company that relates to some very exciting children and youth type spaces.
Yeah, so in addition to some of the rec centers, we do a lot of faith-based work. And this first one, Calvary Life Center, was really their center for a lot of multi-purpose activities. Youth had a large activity game room on the first floor. Had a bunch of pool tables and all kinds of gaming and everything that really the teenagers wanted. We worked with to the right was actually Central Church of God. It was the way it was set up was kind of like a coffee bar, but it was a multi-purpose space and had other breakout spaces for teens and activity groups. And then we have First Baptist Rock Hill had again, a sort of a gathering life center that was had again a game room for breakout and teens. It also they called it the Rock, and we actually found a large rock and brought it inside. We dug around and we actually found one big enough that they liked, and we actually put it inside the actual entryway. So they really liked that idea. And then to the other side was really First Assembly of Concord. They call it their 365-degree club, which is again youth-based, a lot of auditorium, stage, breakout spaces, coffee bar, basically a large multi-purpose gathering space for teenagers.
Okay, so we've talked about a number of projects, the community center projects and those types of projects, but the next question is why that experience matters. And for us, what we believe it does is it offers us an insight into certain things that it takes to design these type of facilities and certain considerations that you want to be careful about when you design a community center. So we call them important design considerations for community centers. The first one is actually pretty simple, but all too often it's not attended to in design, and that is a clear definition of public entries, because it's so important these days, especially with security concerns, that your main entry be identifiable. Now, building codes are always going to require separate exits and things like that, but having a clear, identifiable entry is extremely important in these facilities. The next one is that, and as you probably know this because you've done a lot of work already, you're going to probably have some multi-purpose rooms, and they're going to be designed to be flexible, because we all know that a lot of times in these facilities, you're going to have multiple activities in those multi-purpose rooms. So there's certain things you need to do and keep in mind when you do that. When you just sort of label something a multi-purpose room, it doesn't always work unless it has the support. And what I mean by that, the folding partition walls that actually do create a sound barrier instead of the ones that don't do that. Appropriately sized and located storage rooms. That is really important, and all too often it's overlooked. A lot of times what we'll see is that, yeah, we've got this great multi-purpose room, but we can use it for this and this. And our storage rooms are down the hall, down the steps, and over there. And it just doesn't work. So you really got to think through those. A perfect example, Bessemer City. The big sort of dining room, folding partition, a separate space so that it could be made bigger, very closely located storage room for chairs, tables, and other things, catering kitchen located right there. All of that was thought through. Sounds real simple, but you really do need to think through those things so those multi-purpose rooms can actually function well as multi-purpose. AV, electrical, and mechanical all must work with multiple room configurations. Way too often what you see, now Ron doesn't do this, but is that you've got a ceiling grid here and a ceiling grid there. And you've got your mechanical that works for that and your electrical that works for it as separate rooms. When you open up that partition and everything's mixing, and you might have two different zones, suddenly you can have problems. So it's really important for your architects and your engineers to be thinking symbiotically. I mean, we really have to be on the same page. So once again, that multi-purpose room actually functions the way it needs to. Okay? We'll move on to the next one. Crystal?
So you've heard Jim talk about staying on the budget, and I like to find out what your budget is as well to make sure that your building finishes are going to fit within your budget. But more important is that not only the aesthetics, but the materials that we choose, because we want whatever is put into this building to last you for not just a year or 2 years. We want it to last 10 years, 15 years down the road. So we like to make selections based on the cost of the material and the durability and the ease of maintenance. I can put beautiful materials in your building, on the floor, on the walls, but if you can't maintain them, it's not going to serve your building well. So that's very important to us. And then the other thing is to follow through. One thing we always specify for floors is an epoxy grout. So how do you tell if you get an epoxy grout? Because if you walk in the room and see it, you're not going to know. But we know, and I work with John, and he will make sure that it's the right product and have it replaced if he needs to, if it's not the right product. Also, the furnishings, should you need help with furnishings, we do lots of public projects, and we work off a North Carolina state contract as well as some of the other pre-negotiated contracts. So we're able to get you the best price installed using those contracts, and we can tell you the difference between them.
We take a proactive approach to construction administration. As a member of the team, my job doesn't start just when construction starts. I am a registered architect. My job starts during construction documents in the office, taking what I see in the field and applying that to constructability reviews and quality control of the documents. I hold site visits. I do site visits. I hold monthly meetings. Those are available to all the stakeholders that want to be a part of it. The idea is to keep everybody informed. If everyone's informed, then quick resolutions to issues can be had. But I am constantly looking for possible issues before they become issues, because none of us like to have issues. One of my favorite tools are pre-installation meetings. And that's where I'll sit down with the trade and with the general contractor in a specific trade, and we'll go over what that trade is going to do who he's going to interact with, what materials are going to interact, how they're going to be installed. We'll talk about epoxy grout and make sure that's on board. And we'll do all that before the first thing happens with that trade. That way it builds consensus, it builds teamwork, and also builds accountability.
Thank you, John. And the last one of our sort of design considerations is what we'll call contextual design is very important. And what I mean by that, it goes back to what I said before. Your community center doesn't need to look like anybody else's community center. So when it comes to the outside, one of the most fun things for us as architects is to find out from you, the stakeholders, the project team, what you want this facility to look like. What does it need to look like for the town of Lewisville? What you've seen throughout here are a lot of different designs. The one from Mecklenburg County in the park is different from Cordelia. That was a park-like setting. This was supposed to represent the steel and the glass of downtown Charlotte. That's what they wanted. This one is actually a library that's going on. It's being built right now in Lincoln County. It's out in a rural area with houses all around it, so it has sort of a more residential look, almost an arts and craft look to some of it. And so the next slide even shows that more of all the different designs that you see. You don't see one design from our firm. What that means is that we're experienced in designing public buildings that are context-specific and compatible with the character of each town. And it is truly a joy for us to find out what that needs to be for the town of Lewisville. All right, so one last thing. We did have, that's a little bit more about sort of our firm, our history, how we operate, our experience. We did have a few initial thoughts about process. We'll go to the next slide. Community centers can be very complex projects, and as I said before, building that consensus is very important. You've done a lot of work to date. Because they're complex projects, we employ a 5-step process to get the project off to a good start. For community centers, it's really, really important. And so the first step, one of the most important, is that when we meet with the town's project team, including all the stakeholder groups, we want to review any and all work that's been done to date, and I know you've done a lot of good work to date. We're going to discuss scope, budget, schedule, but most importantly, we're going to discuss your vision for the project. I know that you guys have had a lot of thought into this so far, and so once again, that needs to be transferred into our heads, your vision for the project. Number 2, complete the programming workshop charrette process. We've already talked about that. I won't go through that. But that's going to give us the first part of the roadmap. That's going to tell us how big the building's going to be, what spaces are going to be in the building. We're going to have sort of those puzzle pieces defined at the end of that step. When that's done, we move into step 3. We're going to formulate initial design concepts. This is, again, once again, where we get to have fun. That's where we're going to be doing the design for interior sketches and how it lays out, exterior look of what it might look like on the outside. We're going to have plans, floor plans, site plans. We'll have 3D analysis, and we'll have cost estimates done. Once again, I'll go back to that. Even back in the sort of the initial design concept stage, we have to be thinking about cost. And so that has to be part of that phase. We're going to use the latest 3D video software to help the town visualize the design concepts. And then step 4, once we've done this, we bring these initial concepts to you, to the project team. And we work with you to study the pros and the cons, very similar to that charrette process that we do in programming, but now we're into design. So we're going to work with you to study the pros and cons of each concept in the design. We're going to keep an eye on all of the goals and objectives that we've set from day 1. And then number 5, remember that funnel. It's the same thing that we talked about in programming. It's actually the same thing when you start designing a building. We're going to work together to reach consensus on the design concept deemed the best in meeting the town's goals and objectives. We're not the kind of firm that comes back and says, we're done, do you like it? No, it's done a different way. So the design itself is even born out of working with you, coming up with ideas and letting us do the heavy lifting. Let us get out there and do some designs and bring them to you and get your concepts and your ideas about what we've designed. So in the end, what we want to do is make sure that we've met your programming objectives, your budget objectives. We've talked about the project schedule, and we feel good about that. And then also make sure that we've met your functional and aesthetic goals and objectives. Very, very important. So once we've done all that, then we'll document it, and we'll provide visual documentation of the design. So hopefully, if technology works, we're going to show you a video of what that means. Because nowadays, what we're able to do for you is to give you a very realistic feel for what the building could look like. Let's see if we got this. This is for a project that we're doing just up the road in Pilot Mountain State Park. We're doing a new visitor center up there for them. It's not working. Okay. Mike's going to go to the next slide, if he can. All right, he's stuck. He is going to work on the IT for this while we open it up for all your questions. Why don't we do that? Oh, you got that. Oh, no, that's not it. Yeah, there you go. Come on back one. There. We'll leave that up, and then why don't you see if you can work on the video. Okay? So let's open it up for all your questions.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you design, if necessary, with an eye towards future expansion of a building?
Absolutely.
And do you have an example of that, or how does that work?
Sure. It may not be up here. I think one of the examples that you saw, the Lincoln County Library, you saw a quick image of it, but that's probably a perfect example. Libraries are the same way when it comes to sort of branch libraries. We really do think towards expansion, and that actually starts when we start doing the site development concepts. Because when we start doing site development concepts, we haven't worked together to come with the exact program. We're still formulating that, but we will put something down on paper to test sites out. Even when we do that, we start thinking about, well, in the future you may grow, so will this site allow for that growth? We carry that same concept into the schematic design. Now, it's too easy to just say, well, you can just expand the building. The real problem, here we go, okay. So what the software allows us to do is to give you a realistic feel for what the building's going to look like. When we did this for the North Carolina State Park System, it helped us to define the materials, the stone, the glass, the wood. They got to see it in 3D. They got to analyze it three-dimensionally and say, well, we like this part of the building, but we don't like that part. Can you change that, or can you use a different material there? Very interactive process. You get to see things like contours. You know, a lot of times when we draw things, it's all 2D. Well, the reality is there aren't too many sites that are just flat. So you start to get to see the differences in grade. And what may look like, you know, it may be a flat sidewalk when you draw it on paper. When you see it here and you see that huge grade change, it suddenly hits you. And so you might start to think about that. And so by having these tools and using these tools, it helps us to show you what it's going to look like, and that allows us to get your feedback. Because at the end of the day, we want you to be happy with this building. And so with this software, you can see what it's going to look like before it gets built. All right, back to your question about the expansion, because I want to follow up on that. It's too easy to just simply have your building and draw a little dotted line that says future expansion. The real hard work, the heavy lifting, is to make sure that it can actually work. So you really have to have an idea of what's going to go in that space. And then even when you're drawing the part that's going to be built, you have to know where the corridors are going to connect. You have to know how the structure is going to work to tie into the existing building. A lot of thought has to be put into making that a realistic addition. And so that's the key.
Just an easy question. What does ADW stand for?
Oh, great. Goes back to original founding fathers of the company. Atkinson, Dyer, and then Watson was added. So, yeah. And now I'm one of the current owners, and we don't want to add names. We just like ADW. We shortened it to ADW, and so that's where it is.
I have a question about Dilworth, the Dilworth project.
Yes, sir.
You indicated that there were a lot of scattered thoughts before you entered the scene. So what would you consider the pivot point that you brought to it that was able to create some consistency with the group?
Sure, great point. I think for us, it was following that process of meeting with them individually. That was the real key starting point. I don't think they had done that. And we made the list of each one's, must-haves, would like to have, and if we can. And we started sort of cross-referencing those. So we found some commonality to start, and we built upon that. And then the ones that they couldn't have, or the ones that weren't crossing, so to speak, we discussed those too. But then the site analysis and the budget, as I pointed out there, we started bringing some real-world effects into the programming, because some of the things they wanted to do just simply wouldn't fit on the site. And some of the things that they wanted to do, they simply couldn't afford. So that knocked out a few more. So we started getting some things that people could start to agree on, and they started getting out of their sort of their own camps and started to look at it holistically. And we got them to say, well, I really want that, but you know, if we had this, it could probably work. And then we'd say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Okay, can we make that a little better? Can that work for you? And that sort of thing. So it wasn't easy, but it worked. So.
So I asked this of the last group. I like sort of consistency across the board. Again, thank you for being here. So in terms of the interior health of the building, building envelopes are really tight in this day and age. Well, they have been for multiple years. How do you guys address, maybe Crystal, you could speak to this as well, selection of material to ensure the interior health through water-based, watching that epoxy grout, ensuring low VOCs, et cetera?
Yeah, I'll start, and then you do the heavy lifting. How's that? Nobody asked about sustainable design. We don't know where you are on that. We as a firm, and most architects nowadays, are going to do your base building design is much more sustainable than it used to be in terms of use of materials. Whether you just want good sustainable design, whether you want LEED certification for your building, or anywhere in between, we're capable of. We have many LEED certified buildings. We've got a lot of LEED accredited professionals in our office. I don't know if in the previous interview if it was talked about, they are a leader in the Southeast when it comes to sustainable design and LEED when it comes to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. They give seminars. They're very, very good at it.
So with the building products, we like to use commercial manufacturers. They all have outside like a third-party testing on most of the materials. Carpet is that way, for example. We use low VOC paints on all of our paints. And, you know, a porcelain tile, it can be reused. It can be ground up and made back into another tile. So we look at products like that. Vinyl wall covering is one that it's kind of had its heyday and then it's gone down. No one's using it, and then it's starting to come back right now. But a lot of the materials have different recipes for the makeup, like the backing of the products have changed. And so we look at the backings, and we found in some instances it is better and it is a healthier product, but in other, like a vinyl upholstery is a big one. They're using a urethane backing on that. Well, we've had issues with it where it's not holding up or performing. So we look at our past projects and how they have performed to make recommendations in the future.
So I'm going to give you like a three-choice question here. You mentioned follow-through. You mentioned proactive, and you mentioned budget. So in those things, you're involved with subcontractors and our contractors and our general contractors. So this philosophy that you say you are using, when you meet with these bid contractors, are they receptive to the philosophy, and how do you present that to them so that you can get a buy-in?
Right, good point.
Just to get a buy-in, and they've got a buy-in because they're the guys who do the work.
Right, yeah. I'm gonna probably steal his thunder and then I'll let him finish it. Basically, what we're doing is, we as a firm, and John especially, because he's our Director of Construction Administration, have seen a lot of lessons learned in construction. We've seen a lot of things built the wrong way. And unfortunately, a lot of times what happens on construction sites is you've got your general contractor and then you've got all your subs. And nowadays, most buildings are built by your subcontractors. The general contractor does very little work. He's sort of the coordinator of everything. And so the subcontractors are out there doing their thing, and all too often, lessons learned and problems that have occurred in the past aren't discussed. And so they just dive in and they start building things. John goes out, sees it, and says, guys, this isn't per plans and specs. It's not the way it's supposed to be, and you have to rip down the wall. Well, he goes out there with a positive attitude, and he says, guys, we need to have a meeting. We need to have a pre-installation meeting before you start putting up that masonry wall. Sometimes, yes, there's resistance. Well, yeah, we know how to do it. Guys, I don't want you to have to tear it down. Yeah, no, don't worry, we can do it. Guys, we've seen this before. You really want to have a pre-installation meeting so I don't have to tell you to tear it down. Usually by the third time, I think they usually acquiesce and have the pre-installation meeting. Then he's able to tell them about all the lessons learned. He's able to tell them how he wants the joints tooled, and it can't be done this way, and it has to be done that way. All the things that he would reject it, he's going to tell them beforehand. And when he does it that way, usually at the end of those meetings, they're like, okay, I'm glad we had this meeting. So I'll let you, did I say it right?
Very good. No, the general contractors and the subcontractors are usually very receptive to it. Again, it builds a sense of teamwork on the site and some accountability. And the general contractors like that, especially with their subcontractors. So if something does happen or isn't installed per plans and specs, then a general contractor has some recourse. But the idea is to get out there ahead of it. And again, look for the issues that possible issues so they don't become issues. Just as an example, I'll tag on to dovetail onto what she was saying. Low VOC materials are mostly water-based. And so most of your adhesives in the flooring are now water-based. Well, concrete's got moisture in it from when it was poured. So your low VOC adhesives on your flooring don't like to attach to a concrete floor very well. And we've seen issues with that. There are ways to take care of that and to test the concrete before the flooring subcontractor even gets there. I will talk to the flooring contractor about that. So we'll all be on the same page. We'll know how to put the adhesive down. We'll know what the concrete moisture should be. So that way there are no issues because they don't want the issues either.
So answer, that's fine. Any of you guys can answer the follow through. So in this architectural process you guys are creating for us, we got this child, we raised it, and y'all were there helping, and then you turn him over to us, and we're like, okay, how long do you stay after we get the child in our hands to kind of help us manage that child? Do you help us manage the child after you finish the work?
Oh, absolutely, sir. The general contractor holds a 1-year warranty, and I have it on my Outlook calendar that I will give the contractor a call 11 months after substantial completion, after the job's done. I'm there, I'm a phone call away, and I stay with you, we'll be there even after that. We want that reference. We want you to be happy, and we want that reference because that's our next job. And so we'll be there for you, and we always will.
And the reason he can say that is because we have, and I'll actually get into this in this slide, we feel like we have some really great references. And as John said, the big part of our philosophy is making sure our clients are happy, especially at the end when you walk away and you have a great building.
So I asked this in the previous presentation, so I'll ask you since you're not from Lewisville.
Almost. I lived in Winston-Salem for 9 years.
Okay. Well, Lewisville is a unique community because we have a couple of shining stars. One was still is our old mill in town. And so the mill was always something that people would know where to meet. Let me meet the mill. And so then we got this great town hall was built. And then someone said, this little cramped library we've had for 200 years, we need to build a new one. So this community's really big about our shining stars, I call them, because they talk about our community, our beautiful commons area here where we have a war memorial, we have a great place for acts. Sallifer Square, thank you very much. All that is a really important part to us as a community because we can talk about it, people know it, recognize it, and lots of people come visit our community. So in this process of you building this, you don't know what it looks like or anything like that at this point, but so in your other buildings that you've built, have you had any vision or feelings about trying to give us a new shining star, or one that we could talk about also like the others, that people would go, wow, that's another shining star that Lewisville's doing?
Absolutely. And that's why I said, we come into this, we're not trying to design this for ADW. We're not trying to put it on our wall and say, hey, that's a great, this is our building. The design needs to be born of your goals and objectives. And when I talked about every town is different, you want to find the character of the town, we're looking for your shining stars. I know all about the mill. I was serious. I lived in 381 Flint Valley Court, Peacehaven Estates, off of Peacehaven Road for 9 years, and I know Lewisville very well. My dad owned an auto parts store at Country Club Auto Parts, and I delivered parts over here. I know enough of the history. I'm not perfect, but I know enough of the history to know that you do have shining stars. That's what we're looking for. We want something to work with so we can create the next shining star. But we aren't living in the community the way you are. So we need that input. You give us that input, let us do the heavy lifting and come up with concepts for your new shining star. We bring them back to you and we talk about them. And then we find the one that's right for you, that makes the statement that you want for your community. What you just said is exactly how we operate. So, thank you.
Anyone else? Very good. Gentlemen, your closing pitch.
Thank you. Thank you. I was hoping to get one last minute. Probably the other firm, and everybody always has this kind of slide. It says, why ADW? I'm not going to go through the first four because hopefully you've seen that throughout our presentation. I'm going to move to number 5. Very, very important to us, part of our philosophy. It says, we offer leadership, experience, and expertise in a friendly and professional manner. We are committed to providing a high level of customer service. What that means is that we feel like in our profession, architects and engineers sometimes lose sight of the fact that we're a service provider. And yes, it's a professional service, but we're still a service provider. And in every service providing industry, the most important thing is customer service, keeping your customers happy. So how do we do that as architects? Well, number 1, we meet your goals and objectives. Number 2, we're committed stakeholders in the project. When we come on board, we're part of your team. We're looking out for you. We want your best interest. We want your building, your signature building that's going to say Lewisville for it. We're team players with a cooperative attitude, and I come back to, we believe our design must achieve our clients' goals. That's what it comes down to. ADW designing a building that you can be proud of that meets all your goals and objectives. If we do that, we're providing good customer service. If we do that, you're going to give us a good reference. If you give us a good reference, we get to go down the road and do another project. And as John said, it's really that simple. It's no more complicated than that. We believe in customer service. We believe in doing a good job because you'll give us a reference. We'll have a fantastic project. We'll have a great relationship throughout this. And then you'll give us a good reference, hopefully, and we'll move on and get more projects. It's really that simple. It's not a complicated formula. We believe in it. It's part of our philosophy. And I know that I can stand up here and say it all day long, but this is the part that's really important. Please check our references. We feel like that if you check our references and ask them the hard questions about us, you're going to find that these things hold true. We think you have a very interesting project. We're always looking for projects like this where, as you said, you're looking for something that's going to say Lewisville. We're looking for projects like that. You know, we all love it in our office that there's all the projects we do, but this is a special project. This will mean something to you. It'll mean something to us, and we'd love to be a part of it. Thank you for your time and all your questions.
Folks, thank you very much for coming. Be sure you turn in your evaluation forms in the back there. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for being here tonight. Folks watching at home, thanks for watching at home. We will take all your feedback tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We have our working group, and we're going to sit down and start going through all your feedback, reviewing kind of the specs that we've talked about, and we'll have an architect selection hopefully by 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock tomorrow. When we hit that point, I'll send year and a half or 2 years from now, you're going to drive down Lewisville Clemens Road and you're going to look off to your right, and you're going to say, holy cow, I want to go there. Thank you all for being here.